So I want to try to explain why we're seeing what we're seeing, where the counteroffensive has been slow, and we see it as slow. And I did a video about this yesterday, and please go back to that. But there's a reason why things are happening the way that they are. So I'm looking at the Kyiv Independent. This is Sunday, September 3rd, 2023. New brigade bears heavy brunt of Russia's onslaught in Kharkiv Oblast. Now, there's a reason why things are happening the way that they are. This is talking about a particular brigade that was newly formed. And I'm going to go through some highlights, and then I'm going to go through a number of little bits from Twitter. I'm going to look at the deep state map. I'm going to look at a little video before we're done. So please stay with me. But here's what. Let's read this together. Ihor, a former lawyer, recalls, and that so it's following him as he's talking through this. The attack that was well prepared. The Russian troops scouted out the position where they're seemingly limitless drones. We talk about drones a lot, and it's been giving Ukraine an advantage, but it also can cut both ways. The Russians are using these drones just as much. Enemy artillery established fire control over the only roads leading to the village, cutting off medevac and reinforcements. This left Ihor's unit with their 3 weeks of NATO basic training and 2 months deployment in Kharkiv Oblast, one-on-one with professional Russian troops with superior firepower. So where they're talking about is over here in, well, not here, over here in, this is Kharkiv, and this is that line. This is where you were hearing over the last few weeks the Russians saying, there's 100,000 Russians over here. Well, there might not be that many, but there are some professional troops, some significant forces on this border. Well, why are they there facing off against these Ukrainians with very little training? So again, they have 3 weeks of NATO basic training, which is not nothing. That's actually pretty good compared to what they might have otherwise had. Ihor's company is part of the 32nd Separate Mechanized Brigade, one of the new brigades that Ukraine began staffing at the start of the year. It's also one of the few brigades that are set to hold the northeastern front. Okay, what it's doing, while it's doing its duty of defending Russia's push against Kharkiv Oblast, lack of experience and the limits of training and equipment made for a harrowing first 2 months in the field. And it did. Now, why? Why do they put these people here on this front over here rather than somewhere else? Well, they're holding the line. Now, I don't think Russia's going to be able to make this big push. And if you've been tracking with the war, there's been a lot of talk about how Russia's going to go and make this big offensive. I don't think they really can. They've got to get over their own obstacles, let alone be able to make some huge push toward Kharkiv. So I don't think that's realistic. But here's what these guys are up against. And this paints you a picture of what Ukrainians are really going through on the front lines. And this is why I found it to be important. Before January, the 32nd didn't exist, and the vast majority of its soldiers were civilians who had never shot anyone. Many did not want to be in the army. This brigade is deployed to Kharkiv Oblast. Russian forces were alleged to have up to 100,000 troops that way. Now, whether they have that many or not, they still have professional soldiers on that line as well. The Russians in this area are experienced and well-equipped soldiers. Soldiers from the 32nd are open about how in over their heads they often feel. The infantrymen talk about being outmatched. Everything, this is a quote, everything is not like what you read in the daily briefings and on the news, unquote. Volodymyr, an infantry sergeant with the brigade, said. Now that's going to be repeated. You're going to find that if you're watching the Russian talking heads, if you're watching Russian repeaters who repeat Russian propaganda, that line, I can almost guarantee you, if I was a betting man, I'd put money on it right now, will be repeated on these shows, on The Dive or Scott Ritter or Douglas McGregor or those kinds of characters. Like most units, the 32nd is starved for vehicles and artillery ammo. Most of this good equipment is deployed to the counteroffensive in the Zaporizhzhia front. Okay, so what's going on? So over here on the deep state map, over here it's not being, they're not putting their best and brightest. I don't mean that in the mean way. I'm just saying they're not using their best talent here because Now, here's another article. NATO trained recruits admit that they're being overpowered by Russia's battle-hardened troops in the northern sector. See how this is framed in Business Insider? And here's everything is not like what you read on the news. The recruit told the Kyiv Independent, which is what I'm reading. Okay, so why are they not putting their best there? Because Ukraine's forces and firepower are misallocated, U.S. officials say. American strategists say Ukraine's troops are too spread out and need to concentrate along the counteroffensive's main front in the south. And so that's what they're trying to do with them. So these guys are just trying to hold the line. These guys aren't trying to take land from the Russian-controlled oblast. They're just trying to hold on to what they have. Like most units, the 32nd is starved for vehicles and artillery and ammo. Most of the good equipment is deployed to the counteroffensive in Zaporizhia. The year 2022 ground down Ukraine's supply of experienced warfighters to the point where there can be said to be a shortage. All of the infantrymen of the 32nd Brigade had been to Germany to train to NATO standards for 3 weeks. Now that's good. 3 weeks is not as long as you'd like to be, but it's not nothing. But they're training to the way NATO forces train, and that's not the reality of life on the ground in Ukraine. The infantry praised the physical training. Press officer Andriy Simonin and his aide Alexander highlighted the life-saving power of tactical medicine training widely practiced in the West. The training also comes with a full set of gear for each soldier, so they're giving them kit and they're getting them basic understanding to be able to survive. However, the same soldiers who spoke to the Kyiv Independent didn't hide their scorn about how the training prepared them for a war that doesn't exist in Ukraine. Now think about that. They're training them one way, but they're experiencing the war very differently. A NATO infantryman knows that he is supported and can advance with the confidence that there's a high likelihood that he won't be killed or maimed, Ihor said. The NATO way of war calls for massive preparatory airstrikes and artillery barrages and demining before the infantry could be sent in, he added. Now, I only have 2 years of Army ROTC. I'm not a military guy. I don't claim to be a military guy. But even I remember what we were taught was laying down suppressive fire and that kind of controlling with that kind of thing, where they don't have the luxury of having the suppression. And so they have to fight very differently. It usually doesn't work that way in Ukraine. The troops said that they sometimes struggle to apply to NATO small unit tactics because there often isn't enough cover to do so. Zarets said that the instructors in Germany put a lot of emphasis on teaching urban combat, but the skills of how to smoke out an enemy from a trench, how to build an assault group, and how to coordinate it with artillery and drone support were lacking. It's just different. And to defend the NATO trainers, they don't have the same experience with this kind of trench warfare. The style of battle in the Ukrainian countryside, blending a World War I trench combat and 21st century tech and tactics, are only seen in Ukraine. They are outside NATO's wheelhouse. It would be helpful for some of these instructors to visit Ukraine. Then you get into another potential problem. The training abroad is still better than Ukraine can offer, and so it's still a positive thing as a net positive. The infantry positions, Sergeant Volodymyr met with Kyiv Independent wearing the bitterly ironic smile of a man forced to endure too much too quickly. Quote, "None of the guys will want to talk to you," unquote, he said. Quote, "They don't want to think about it," unquote. Well, I mean, they're being put in and they feel like they're over their heads. Volodymyr himself refused to speak. By the end, Volodymyr can barely contain his bleak descriptions of the vagaries of combat. Quote, "A heroic feat to jump out from the basement and shoot aimlessly in the general direction, then ended up without an arm or leg or just dead," Volodymyr said. What's the point? Like, look, these guys are put into a terrible position where they don't have exactly what they need to be able to fight. They don't have quite the right kind of training in order to be able to fight, and then they're expected to still do it. It's dangerous to stick a limb out from what cover remained, let alone go to the bathroom, because the Russians in this area are relatively sharp with professional troops and special forces in addition to the conscripts. They're well screened and show little signs of fear. They have night vision drones, Orlands, and other tech. They see everything. Drones are equipped with droppable munitions. It locks you up. You want to take certain actions, but you can't because the Eye of Sauron is always watching, Ihor said. Sounds like absolutely terrible conditions. The Russians are sitting on some of the most advantageous positions in the region, said a tank commander. Yeah, they had 6 months to dig in, so they have advantageous positions. But see, that also tells me this. If I look at a deep state map, and let's look at this. Let's pause and look at a deep state map. I rolled it back to 7/2/2023. So we're going back exactly 2 months. And then I'm just going to click the animation and we're going to watch the changes on the map. There's not going to be much. There's going to be little bits here and there. But as you're looking up and down on this, you're not seeing very much at all. The numbers are changing. It's 7/7, 7/8. Let's go through 7/9, 7/10. You're seeing a little bit here and there, but you're really not. There's a little, right? But they're not going to make a great deal of ground, and there's a reason for it. They're really dug in. They're kind of pushing a little bit, but not much. So the Russians aren't actually going to go anywhere. I don't believe that they're going to make some kind of major push to Kharkiv. That's not going to happen. Again, it keeps changing a little bit on the periphery, but that's it. So they don't have to do a lot except hold the line, while the major push is further south. Now, nevertheless, the Russians are in these advantageous positions, and so because they're in these advantageous positions, it's really hard for the Ukrainians trying to make any headway on the other side of that as well. Okay, infantrymen criticize their training as unrealistic for a scenario when you're out of everything but the enemy. That's an eloquent way of speaking. But most acknowledge that it was helpful in some ways. Soldiers also laid blames on their command for specific decisions. For example, taking up a position in a narrow basement that was impossible to escape quickly if the conditions turned life-threatening. Like that's an unforced error. But the brigade's commanding officers have to make the best decisions that they can with the information that they have and live with what happens. Without a corps of experienced veterans, the command staff in these brigades is leaning on the job or learning on the job just like everyone else. Russia's massive artillery advantage throughout the country and its predominance of drones and electronic warfare on this part of the front don't help either. And so that's pretty much it with the article. That gives you a picture of what Ukrainians are actually going through and why it's so difficult. Why is it taking so long to get through? And if you want some more about why it's taking so long to get through, watch this video about the breakthrough that's happened in the south. And then this is partly Arthur Ray talking at the very beginning, and then it's partly a United 24 clip of these American soldiers explaining what Ukrainians have to go through. Please watch that video if you want more about that. Okay, so I also want to show you some other things. It's not all negative. There's some positives. Remember, Ukraine is creating massive havoc by drone strikes into Russia, and Russia's now having to figure out how do they protect themselves. Well, one way that they're protecting themselves, watch this. Brace yourselves, because Russians have once again showcased unparalleled innovation. What you're looking at is a satellite image featuring a Tu-95 strategic bomber covered with car tires. According to them, this should protect strategic bombers from drones. Well, we'll see how well that works, but that's what they're actually doing in order to do this. So the Russians don't have it together either. So as much as I feel for the plight of people that are on the front line trying to figure out like what can we actually do with the little experience that we have, with the lack of ammunition, not as much as we would like to have. You never go in with as much as you'd like to have, but as much as I feel for them, remember the Russians are also in many ways jacked up. I want to leave you with this final clip, and this was old. This was from April 9th, but I just saw it and it melted my heart. This is, soldiers normally when they go into an area are, trying to win the hearts and minds, and they're giving out candy to kids. Well, this is a kid giving out candy to the soldiers, and I was just thinking, wow, that's, he's giving these out, and just like, wow. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. More than anything else, thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. I'll be back tomorrow, and I hope you will be too.